It's a pleasure to welcome everybody to the latest Knowledge Network on Climate Assemblies workshop, this time on how to support or whether to support participants after an assembly. I think all of us have had an experience of, those of us who have organised or commissioned assemblies, of seeing how empowered participants are at the end of the processes and disappointed that they've come to an end. I guess the question for today is, should the end of the assembly be the end of the process for participants? Do organisers, commissioners or independent foundations have responsibility to support participants after the assembly process has ended? And if so, in what way? That's going to be the focus of what we're talking about today. And you'll be glad to know that actually you're only going to be hearing from me right at the start and right at the end, because I'm going to hand over to my colleague in a second, Pete Bryant, who's from Shared Future in the UK, a community interest company that has run a number of really impressive citizens' juries and citizens' assemblies, including many on climate. He'll also be joined today by Morten, my colleagues Morten and Melda from the Danish Board of Technology, and what looks like a cast of thousands of people who seem to be who are going to be giving some input into the process. Just a reminder that we're recording this. It will be broadcast on the Knoca website after the event. So if for any reason you don't want to be visible, then please don't turn your camera off. But at this point, I'd just like to hand over to Pete and thank him for organising this session, and look forward to the ride he's going to take us on. Pete, over to you.
Thanks very much, Graham. Welcome everybody, really nice to see you all. My name is Pete Bryant, as Graham said, from a not-for-profit organisation called Shared Future in England. And I've had the privilege on working on about 40 deliberative processes over the last 20 years. And I try not to show off, but to mention that without fail, at the end of each of those processes, there are a majority, I would say, of participants that say to us, well, we're not going anywhere. We've done this process. We really enjoyed it. We're now hugely knowledgeable. We're now really, really enthusiastic, and we want to do more. We want to do more stuff. So what can we do? So I hope that today is going to be an opportunity to explore that very issue. What could happen after a process is finished? So we'll be talking about citizens' assemblies, and we'll be talking about the smaller version, citizens' juries as well. So the program Nana has posted into the chat, but I'm going to share a few examples of the different options of post-assembly or jury action in a second, and then we're going to hear briefly from examples from Austria, Spain, England, Scotland and Denmark. And then we're going to have some small group question and answer session. And then we'll go into small groups once again to look at some of these issues in a little bit more depth. But I thought it would be really, really appropriate for the first proper words from for this afternoon session to come from participants themselves in a series of processes. So I'm really pleased that we're joined by some of the members of the Blackburn with Darwin Citizens Jury on Climate Change, who are waving at you now. And also from Thomas Müller, who was a member or is a member of the Austrian Climate Assembly. Thomas is also waving. So I'm going to just hand over, first of all, to Blackburn to hear from Shamim and then Danny a little bit about their motivation for wanting to carry on after the jury there had finished. Shamim, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Hope you can. Sorry, I've typed it all out, but otherwise I'll stray off course from what I want to say. Firstly, I'm Shamim, and I'm a member of the Blackburn with Darwin People's Jury that started together as a group on the 26th of September 2022 to help combat the climate crisis that is affecting our planet. There are many reasons why I have remained with the group since we actually completed the time limit that we had been given to work together as a group last year. Just say if you can't hear me at all as well, or if I'm going too quickly. One of the reasons being that when I do speak to people about climate change, I feel like I'm being taken a lot more seriously now that I'm part of a group like this, and so can make people more aware of what is happening without actually frightening them. I also find I get strength from the knowledge that was shared with us on the first few sessions about climate change from professionals that we trust, like scientists and lecturers, etc., who all shared their information with us to help us come to a clarified judgment as to what we needed to do about the climate crisis. I also feel that after the really successful launch event that we held earlier this year, in which lots of local industries and large associations promised and made pledges to help us in what we're trying to achieve in working to bring changes in the climate crisis we're all facing. And I feel that we're growing from strength to strength. For example, we met with one of our local MPs 2 weeks ago, and she was so excited by what we were doing and wanted to help us with our recommendations. And following on from that meeting, wanted to arrange to keep in contact with us on a regular basis. I feel we are only just at the beginning of all we can do together, and that small changes, but we can all make small changes we can bring about. I also just want to add, I'm really glad of the support of a company like Shared Future, who are completely impartial, but have supported us in so many ways and clarified and explained things along the way when we've needed it. We're a group of quite strong-minded people, and it's of a huge benefit to have a mediator present who is managing to keep our communications open and our discussions on track.
Thanks, Rune. Danny, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I'm Danny. When I initially started the climate change jury, I didn't concern myself that much with climate change, but by the end of the jury, I changed my mind. And it was an important issue. Sorry, 1 second.
Technical problems.
There was talk about it just being brushed under the carpet, as most governments and local authorities only stick with the hot topic till the next one takes its place. So for the benefit of my children and my family, I wanted to help do my part and help keep pushing the message of climate change to make people actively change, and keep reminding MPs and local governments to make the changes needed and not just nod their heads and do nothing until the next topic arises. That's it.
Nice one. Thanks a lot, Danny. So you'll have a chance to hear from the other members of the Blackburn with Darwen climate jury that are in the room a bit later today. But now I'd like to hand over to Thomas Müller, who was or is a member of the Austrian Climate Assembly. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Thomas. I was member of the Climate Assembly, of the Austrian Climate Assembly in 2022. We issued 93 proposals. And during the last meeting of the Assembly, we founded an association, which is in some sense continuing the work of the Climate Assembly. And we have about 60% of the people working who are working in the Climate Assembly are now members. And we have a classical association organization with a board and with some working groups dealing with the politics engagement, dealing with the financial topics, getting funding, dealing with online communication, end. And we see why we founded this association was we wanted to create an entity which is able to follow up and the implementation of what we demanded, because otherwise nobody would be there anymore after the end of the civic assembly. And this was one of the reasons. The other reason was that many of our people are getting infected a bit with this climate and environmental protection agenda, and they just wanted to go on with this work, and many of us also became friends, and we wanted to continue this extraordinarily successful work of the climate assembly we had. These were the main reasons. So we are now getting seen in the political landscape. We have a lot of meetings with politicians. We were invited to a lot of events. We network also with other assemblies. We are now looking forward to the anniversary of the handover of our proposals at the 4th of July. And this is a very special event because at this time we are coming back more or less to the meeting where we handed over, and now we can say what has been done in the meantime, right? And this is our main purpose as a Verein, as an association, to follow up the implementation of the proposals.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Thomas. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so before we hear from our examples in Austria, Spain, England, Scotland, and Denmark, I'm aware I might sound a bit like a Eurovision Song Contest host. I thought that it might be an idea for me to just kind of really quickly summarize some of the big breadth of options of what can happen after a process is finished in terms of jury and assembly involvement. So I'm just going to talk at you for about just under 5 minutes to give you a bit of a taste of what has been done in this space so far. So I think there can be stuff that, and we've seen that there's stuff that individuals have taken once they've finished being part of a jury or an assembly. We've seen more collective examples of where citizens that have been part of a process have come together to take action. And we've seen in instances where there's been a lot of support from the commissioning organisation, be it the national government or the local government or whoever, or other examples where there's been less support after the process is finished from the commissioning body. So I wanted to give us a way of trying to maybe think through and make sense of all these different examples. Can you all see a really boring looking box on your screen? Okay. So I want to give you some examples, maybe using this framework, which might help us to think a little bit about what the options are. So on the right there, we've got people taking individual action. On the left, we've got collective action, maybe the forming of an association. And at the top there, we've got a lot of support from the commissioning body. And at the bottom there, we've got a lower level of support or assistance from the commissioning body. So I want to give you some examples of what people have been up to. So first of all, the Blackburn Citizens Jury here, an example, we just heard from them a moment ago. They met 2 weeks ago with their local MP. So they got a lot of support to be able to do that from the local authority there and through us working for the local authority. Individual action, some examples of this. So in the bottom right-hand corner there, this is no kind of support provided by the commissioning body. This is just individuals acting on their own. So people talking to friends, family, work, colleagues, those people around them, maybe actually during the process as well as after the process. And I remember a jury I ran a good few years ago where I was chatting to one of the participants during the break. And I said, so how many people, out of interest, how many people do you think you've chatted to over the last week about this issue and about the process, about the jury? And he said, I've counted them and I've spoken to 120 people. I said, wow, that's amazing. He said, yes, I'm a second-hand car salesman. So maybe we need to have assemblies of second-hand car salesmen and hairdressers or something like that to try and use as a way of getting the word out. So that's another example of, I guess, individual action being taken by members. Another still there that you can see on the grid is people actually becoming politicians after a process is finished. And I think a number of the members of the French Climate Assembly went on to become politicians. And in the photo there, you can see some members of the Scottish Climate Assembly who went to COP26, the big climate change UN conference, to talk to others about the need generally, or the argument for having citizens' assemblies generally. And then we can look at more kind of collective responses as a jury or assembly is finished. And a good example of this is, and we'll hear from Susie about this in a second, the Scottish Climate Assembly members being brought back together as a group. So lots of support from government for this to be able to happen, to respond to the government's response to the recommendations that came out of the assembly there. And finally, another couple of examples of collective action, and in this case, members of the assembly or the jury actually forming their own organization after the process is finished. The big example of this was Les 150, the 150 from the French Climate Assembly, and we'll hear from Paula shortly about her work with the Austrian Climate Assembly members who went on to form an association. So lots of examples there. Nana has put into the chat the Miro board that we're going to be using in this afternoon's workshop. And I've put a version of that framework there on the board. So it'd be wonderful if you wanted to add to it during the afternoon's discussions. For those of you that are thinking, Miro board, what's he on about? Oh my God, Miro board, what that? Don't worry about it. It's just an extra thing. If you feel comfortable using it, wonderful. If you don't, then don't worry. Just use the chat if you want to say anything. So those are some examples. We're going to hear in a second from some more examples, including Austria and Spain that was mentioned, in Scotland. But I guess what I also wanted to say is that these actions after an assembly or jury has finished are not always straightforward. So there are some challenges, and maybe we can explore some of these this afternoon as well. So some things I've heard have been, for example, as time goes on, is there a danger that the jury or the assembly membership becomes maybe less representative and less diverse? When a process is finished, who do the jury members or assembly members represent? Should they be paid for future involvement? Is there a danger of actually the recommendations in some instances being maybe even undermined by post jury or assembly involvement from citizens? And I guess there's also the issue of power, and how much power should a group after a process have? So hopefully we'll be able to explore some of these things this afternoon in this workshop. But I'd like to hand over now to some of the people that have been doing this work, and each of them are going to talk to you for up to 5 minutes, and I'll give them a minute's warning when we're getting near the end of the 5 minutes. After we've heard from them all, you will have a chance to decide which small group to go into for a small group question and answer. Okay, so we're going to start with Paula Spilauer, who has been working with the Austrian Climate Assembly. Paula, are you good?
Yes. Hi. Yeah, I'm ready, but I'm going to talk fast because I'm not sure that 5 minutes will be enough. So listen up. Hi, everybody. My name is Paula Spilauer. Together with my colleague Laura Grossmann, I was responsible for the engagement of civil society in the Austrian Climate Assembly last year. And before I tell you a bit about what happened after the assembly, I want to give you a quick overview of the process in Austria and some context for my role in it. So how did the Citizens' Assembly in Austria start? There was an Austrian climate referendum, and one of its demands was a participation process on climate action. So the parliament in Austria decided on the first national Citizens' Assembly on the question, how can Austria become climate neutral by 2040? The commissioning body was the Climate Ministry, and the organization and facilitation was led by a consortium of 3 Austrian companies. 100 people from Austria were randomly selected in a way that they represented Austria's population. And they met on 6 weekends, once a month, and were supported by a scientific board. And in June 2022, they presented, as Thomas already mentioned, 93 recommendations to the Austrian government. So what was I doing during this whole time? My position was actually not part of the official contract with the ministry. even though I worked very closely with and sometimes on the weekends also as a part of the organization and facilitation team. But my contract was funded by the European Climate Foundation. And the ECF financed this role based on learnings from previous citizen assemblies to ensure a more meaningful impact on the final recommendations. So some of our key objectives as civil society engagement officers were to inform the broader civil society and established climate actors about the methods and the process of the assembly, to ensure transparency about the process and thus build up trust in the assembly, and also to support the assembly's members in spreading the word about their work. And this became more important once the recommendations were published, because what happened after the 6 weekends, Thomas said it already, the participants formed an association to further push the recommendations. And until the end of the process, it was very unclear if the ministry would supply additional funds to ensure that some of the team members, like the press team, for example, to ensure that they could continue some work. And then it became clear that there wouldn't be any more official support. So my colleague and I, we asked for more funding from the European Climate Foundation to be able to continue our work even after the assembly and to support the association. And the big question now, how did we support the participants post-assembly? I thought about this a lot before this workshop today, and if you'd asked me the question back then, I think I'd said, well, in any way they need it, and I think it's true in a way. But looking at it now, I'd say we basically help them to establish structures of communication. So first there was the internal communication structure of the association, which was so important to establish because the participants went so abruptly from the best support all around, from facilitation, organization, press team, to none at all very fast. So finding ways.
A minute left, Paula.
Huh?
A minute left.
I got it. So finding ways to keep in touch and to communicate post-assembly was very important to keep the collective agency alive. Secondly, there was media relevant external communication, so setting up a website, social media, a newsletter, but also, as Thomas already said, organize follow-up meetings with politicians and doing media work following the government's response to the recommendations. And then thirdly, there were more substantial communications, so keeping in touch with all the actors who had been supportive of the assembly and then finding ways, cooperating with them in new ways, going to important events and becoming active in the home regions. So I'd say those were the main structures of communications we helped set up the association. And that's enough input. I'm done. Thank you. I'm looking forward for questions afterwards.
Wonderful.
And I can confirm that it helped a lot in the beginning. So Paula and Laura's work helped us a lot to get this thing running because we were not so proficient in that. Yeah. Thank you very much again.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Paula. Okay, we're now going to hear from a similar example from Spain. So Leire, are you okay to go ahead?
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this workshop. And I'm also going to try to explain the incredible experience of Spain in 5 minutes. But to set up a bit of context, the Spanish Citizen Assembly was mandated by law, and it was the first one ever in Spain for climate change. It took place in 2021 and 2022. And it was only intended to be just that. The citizens were very motivated and very committed after those learning sessions, and that resulted in 172 recommendations. And they also voted on an outreach plan because the assembly itself had been very limited in communication. We had a lot of confidentiality issues that we had to keep secret, the identity of the citizens. So almost no one knew about the project. So the citizens themselves decided that an outreach plan was necessary, and my organization, REDS-SDSN Spain, decided to accompany them, as well as the other organization, the other organizing structures of the assembly. We decided to keep on supporting the citizens for between a 6 and 10-month period. So helping them implement this plan, and also help them organize themselves into something more, because they verbalized that they want to do something more. So my role specifically was to help them implement this outreach plan, which consisted on presenting this was the citizens' choice. Like no one really wanted to do anything else, but they were like, no one knows about this. Our work was very important, so everyone needs to know about this. And they decided to present it to, well, all the different central government organizations, also in-person meetings with the 17 regional governments in Spain, online events with all the different sectors of society and municipalities. And that was the part that I was helping them do. So contacting the government, or organizing the events, and putting them in contact with whoever they needed, and helping them either prepare the speeches or help them with any technical information they needed. But on top of that, they felt that it wasn't enough, so they were doing more events on their own and being very proactive. And the facilitation team kept working with them also on the way to structure their communication, because again, starting from a point where everything is planned to something that it's not, they needed to decide how to keep the data, their personal data, because the governance structures didn't have their personal data during the assembly. So I had to organize the events without that data, and contacting the citizens was all the responsibility. So they organized in regional communities and also thematic communities. And yeah, I think the important part is that from the beginning, the concept of the assembly here in Spain was to make the citizens own the process and decide everything that they wanted. So they decided on the number of sessions, they decided on the topics, they decided how to vote. They truly owned the process, and they were responsible for the outcome. So that led to them thinking that they could do everything afterwards too, that it was still their choice, and they were so committed that that they conformed an association. And I think that they've now conformed it. And just I think it was also important that they own the process, because when we presented the project and the recommendations to all these different groups, everyone could sense that it was their work. No one questioned the authenticity and the commitment that they had. And that was a thing that surprised everyone. And that's why we think it was a success, and we had such a positive impact in general, especially with regional governments that had other political views. And we had very little debate on possible manipulation from the central government, because this was not an initiative that came from social movements or the third sector or other organizations. This came from law. So it was mandated by the governments. And after they got to meet the citizens, no one really questioned the authenticity of the process, the authenticity of their work. And I think I'm going to stop there and answer all the other questions afterwards.
Amazing. Thanks very much, Leire. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce myself now to talk about an English example. So rather than you have to look at my face, I'm going to show some pictures. Okay, so I want to offer a few examples, a couple of examples from England, and I'm going to. Can you hear me okay? Can you all hear
Yes.
me?
No,
Yeah.
no, it's okay.
Sorry, I got a message saying I'd been muted.
Yeah, you were, but not now anymore.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to share a couple of examples, but I wanted to start with one that is not actually related to climate change. And then I'm going to talk about the Blackburn with Darwin climate change citizens jury, some of which the members are here on the call as well, and will join me in the question and answer session in a second. So back in 2008, some of us ran a citizens jury on obesity in a town in the northwest of England. We didn't use sortition, but we selected a diverse group of citizens from that town. And at the end of the process, I remember really clearly one of the participants grabbing me and saying, that was really great, Pete. And I could feel the but coming. And he said, but do you know what? We're not going to wait for the council to do something, because we're not sure they're going to do anything. We want to form a food co-op. So we'd like to set up a food co-op to make sure that people in our community have access to fresh fruit and vegetables. And a charity that was part of the process heard this conversation and supported them. And some 8 years later, that food co-op was still in existence with 450 people from that local community as members. So that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the citizens jury that was run. Last year we ran a citizens jury on climate change in Blackburn, also in the northwest of England. 30 people recruited to look at the issue of climate change. Usual process, 30 hours of deliberation over a series of evenings and Saturdays. And at the end of the process, the group ran a recommendations launch event. So after the formal process had finished, we asked jury members if they'd like to meet for 2 more evenings to prepare themselves to run a recommendations launch event. They said, yes, we're up for that. And you can see the event in the bottom there. So run almost entirely by the jury members themselves, with a little bit of support in the background from us. And 70 local stakeholders, community groups, businesses, politicians, officers from the public sector came to hear what the jury had done and who they were. And also we pushed them to make a series of pledges as well, which are now being followed up. So this was one example of something that the jury did after the process had finished. The council has also agreed to fund the jury to carry on meeting, and over half of them have agreed to do this over the next year for 10 meetings, where they will check on progress on the implementation of the recommendations by the council, by the voluntary and community sector, and by businesses. And also the jury members that wanted to carry on really wanted to meet their local MP. So the council arranged for that to happen, and some support was given over one evening from an organisation called Hope for the Future, and Ellie's on this call, I think, who helped prepare the group to be able to have that meeting with their MP. So they did lots of research on the background of the MP and looked at the recommendations produced by the jury to try and work out what might be some key asks that could be made of the MP on behalf of the jury members. So that happened 2 weeks ago. And if you go into the small group after this, you can talk to the jury members themselves about that experience. And finally, the other thing that the jury has done since the process has finished is at the launch event, a representative from the National Festival of Making was present, and they were really excited about the process that they saw. And they asked if it would be possible to work in the future with jury members to produce a large piece of art, an artwork, an art installation that would help to underline and raise awareness of the work of the jury. So last week, I think it was last week, jury members interviewed 3 artists or artists groups from the north of England, and have identified the one that they want to work with over the next 6 months to produce a large-scale piece of art that will focus on the recommendations from the jury. So those are some examples of what we've been working on in England. And now I'd like to pass over to Susie to talk about the work of the Scottish Assembly just over the border from us. Go ahead, Susie.
Thank you very much indeed. And yeah, really exciting and inspiring things that hearing from around the world. Just a very quick intro. I headed the Secretariat for Scotland's Climate Assembly, which was set up through an Act of Parliament as part of our Climate Change Act. And the requirement was to hold an assembly and then for government to respond to the recommendations of the Assembly within 6 months. And that's kind of the context of some of the things which we did after the Assembly happening. So I guess we kind of thought about it in 3 ways, in terms of 3 different groups of people that we were going to engage with post-Assembly. And the Assembly worked for 6 weekends, and then they chose to have an additional weekend as part of their deliberations, and that became 7 weekends. And then one of the things which I'll talk about very briefly is an 8th weekend, but that's kind of the structure of it. So the 3 groups of people that we worked with were policymakers, the wider public, and then Assembly members themselves. And I'll talk just very briefly about all of those. So in terms of policymakers, after the Assembly had met and made over 80 recommendations, we arranged meetings between the Assembly members and ministers. We worked with the members to support them ahead of those meetings. And so from the Secretariat's perspective, we saw ourselves as the Assembly members, civil servants, that we were supporting them in the same way as the ministers had civil servants to support them in the process. And this allowed the members to talk to ministers about their recommendations, which was important for the members and for ministers to hear, but also meant that in preparing the ministers, the civil servants were really made to think quite hard about the recommendations, and so it integrated the Assembly members' recommendations into civil service thinking. So there was a kind of obvious reason for doing it, and there was the rather subliminal reason for having those meetings between members and ministers. The second thing that we did was starting to think a bit more about that kind of wider public engagement, where we set up some meetings between the Secretariat and Assembly members and various organisations and stakeholder groups on topics that the members had made recommendations, for example, on housing or on culture. COP26 was kind of part of that process as well. And so giving people who had expertise and interest in a particular area a chance to hear directly from the Assembly members about the recommendations that they had made. The third thing which we did was thinking about how to involve businesses and to tell people more generally about the recommendations. And one of the methods we used for that was developing a civic charter, where we got lots of different organisations, businesses, high-profile individuals to sign the charter and say, not that they supported every detail of every recommendation, but they supported the process where the members had engaged with deliberation and making recommendations, and they wanted that process to be taken seriously. As part of that, we produced quite a lot of nice animations, and you can still find quite a lot of the presentations that we did on our YouTube channel, including an explainer video where we had 2 Assembly members, one from the main Assembly and one from the Children's Parliament, where we brought children under 14 into the Assembly process, talking about the process, why it was important, and the recommendations they had made. And then finally, we brought the Assembly members back for what we called Weekend 8, which was run in a very similar way to the main Assembly, in that there was a process of learning, deliberation, and then decision making. But this was different because this time we were bringing them back together to learn about the government response to their recommendations. So the government went through each of their over 80 recommendations and responded to them. And we had our experts who had supported the members throughout the process of learning about climate change to look at those responses from government and give the members advice about how closely the government response matched the recommendation that the Assembly members had made. As part of that process of Weekend 8, the Assembly members also said that they would like to come back on a regular basis sorry, that's my 5-minute warning to myself, my 5-second warning to myself, just to see how the progress was going, because we recognise that climate change often takes some time to work its way through. And so the Assembly members really wanted to have a formal process where after a year and then after 2 years, they could see whether government was fulfilling its commitment where they had said they would follow through in the recommendations. And they wanted to have a 10-point plan where it would be very transparent whether government was on track or not, but that was not something which government chose to take forward. And then the final thing that I just wanted to mention very briefly was that the funding from Scottish Government also provided a small amount of kernel seed funding to involve who had supported the members in their deliberation process and had designed the Assembly to support them in setting up an organisation. And it was really in the members' own hands what they wanted to get out of it. And I was very inspired listening to Thomas right at the start in what in Austria you had managed to do. And I think that was very much what we were hoping that funding would achieve. I would say it probably hasn't been quite as successful as you've been in Austria, but I'm probably not as close to it as I should be. And so I think it is still continuing in some way. And I'll stop there because I'm conscious I'm over time.
That's great, Susie. Thanks ever so much. That's really, really interesting. Okay, so for our final input, before we go into some small groups for question and answers, I'm pleased that Rune Baastrup is joining us from Denmark. Rune, are you there?
I very much am. Thank you, Pete. Nice to be with you all. I'm the new director of the Danish Board of Technology and will represent some of the local case that we have been developing over the last half a year and running some trainings on in this winter, but starting from a broader perspective. So in the Danish Board of Technology, we did run a national climate assembly a couple of years ago that did not have this direct support for assembly participants. So this is a more local case from a local municipality that would highlight some learnings from, and then also highlight some of our thoughts around it. So I guess just to start out with, it's really key when thinking about innovating around democracy in general and climate assemblies in particular. It's really key to ask ourselves, what is the kind of problem we're trying to solve with assemblies, and how does it work for us? To see this as a small wheel in a broader system, and try and develop ways of making this work ever better in the local, regional, or national context where we're using the assemblies. And then we are thinking around this in various ways in our small community of collaborators. So in terms of purposes, there's 3 different elements to highlight. One is to spread the idea of deliberative democracy and participatory processes and decision-making in other areas such as workplaces or financial institutions, broadening the scope and idea of the importance. And we're keen really on also introducing this into the green energy transition, which is really coming top-down heavily as another example. And then training and building capacity to speak up in public also by participants, and allowing them tools to raise their own voice, and thereby working in ways of democratizing the dialogue around these core issues. And then to organize their local community or peers around collective climate action, and to develop them. I mean, we have such, I love the examples we just had with the different citizens already, that plays into this role as well. And then we are thinking of this in terms of mixing some of our different approaches to achieving change in these areas. And if we zoom out and see the assemblies as part of a broader ecosystem that I was highlighting before, we can see there are at least 3 interconnected cornerstones that might be relevant to try and work to put in place to achieve the more broader systemic benefits of supporting participants post-assembly. So one is the broader notion of collective action, developing leadership and coach participants to develop their shared action and outreach, as we already saw some examples of that were really brilliant. Thinking around how can we build the opinion leadership, training participants in finding their own voice and breaking through media make sure that they actually are able to build on their new knowledge and motivation, and then think of how can we build these stronger or broader ecosystems and structures for gathering. I like the examples from Austria. I see that very much also as an example of building structures that allow people to engage and find each other and connect. That I thought I learned a lot from, and that goes to Spain as well. Building this whole outreach plan is really just a major key and point for this as well. And then in practice, we often see and work with this in terms of capacity building and training, and we try and see if we can make sure to finance courses that allows people to build their democratic competences as a way of mitigating the dilemmas of who's actually in control here, and also to maintain the role of a honest broker and not a mover of the agenda in itself too much. So the work of strengthening collective and individual political efficacy is really the key to allow the citizens to find their own voice and also to appreciate their role in moving agendas, which is not only for the experts or for the elected officials or politicians, and do that through.
Let's go, Rune.
Yeah, through building public relationships and public storytelling. So these are some of the really fine local citizens in the municipality of Hørsholm. That our colleague Mads, who's in the middle there, were meeting and training just a couple of months ago. And basically the assignment from Hørsholm was to help prioritize how Hørsholm municipality might become climate neutral and climate robust municipality there close to the coast. And an open invitation to all, and had a 24 citizens meeting in over a month. And then the municipality was committed to receive and listen, but not necessarily follow up on all of it. And we basically then worked with them to do a training program that had the purpose to transform the newly gained climate knowledge and motivation of participants to build their leadership around collective climate action and in their local communities, and through public action learning and community organizing, and the 5 core leadership practices that we train people in our broader climate work, and then focus on building public relationships and training public narratives for them. So the municipality thought it was great to call it a masterclass in climate action, and it was commissioned by the municipality, and 12 out of 24 panel members chose to participate, and 13 other citizens participate as well, recruited through an open invitation for all citizens in the municipality, and then committed to arranging a green dinner as part of a broader day of climate action was one of their end goals through the training program. And basically, just very short, we are out of time, but these are the core elements of the 3-day training program, going from finding their own voice around what core recommendations they care for from the citizen panel, to train them in building relationship, and then giving them some tools and knowledge of how to think strategically around acting together as part of the training program as well. So just very briefly, this also plays into the broader work of facilitating the evaluation of leadership that we have really great experiences with, also when working with marginal voices and people who are not normally part of the democratic deliberation process in the broader sense. But that will be enough for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rune. So, okay, lots of very stimulating examples there, some at a local level, some at a national level, some with lots of support from the commissioning body, some with less support from the commissioning body. So we want to give you an opportunity now to go into some small groups to do a Q&A, so a question and answer session. So, okay, welcome back, everybody. So we're going to do a very, very brief feedback from the 3 groups. So I thought we could just keep it to 2 minutes for each small group with just some highlights. And ideally, if you manage to have the conversation about what Knoca could or should do after this workshop has finished, in terms of support in this area, then if you could include that in your feedback, that would be great, especially seeing we ran out of time and our facilitator didn't carve aside any time for us to have that conversation. That was me. Okay, Morten, do you want to go first in your group?
Yeah, we have Laura willing to say a few words. Thank you.
Yeah. I think there were maybe like two main buckets of our conversation. One was about the kind of transitioning from the assembly to continuing to engage, in particular thinking about kind of the importance of closing out the assembly and saying we're no longer an official formal institution of the government. We're now individuals who are opting in to ongoing engagement on this. We also were talking some about, from the Austria example, the importance of maintaining some sense of we are random citizens who are a representative body, even in the follow-up, and that's a unique value add in terms of the climate movement, in that then they're able to get meetings with the Conservative Party, which other climate NGOs wouldn't even be able to get in the door. So somehow maintaining that diversity and that kind of unique separation from other climate NGOs seemed important. And then the other piece we were talking about in that transition is how to not lose that value of listening across differences, and kind of that deliberative process as you're shifting from the deliberation into organizing on consensus recommendations, but how to potentially continue to be doing kind of deliberation or dialogue style work in the course of ongoing engagement. And then the second piece we were talking about was around offering capacity building or skill building to folks who have gone through the assembly, both in this art of hosting dialogues, kind of strengthening folks' muscles to actually host deliberative style events in their communities, and then also on organizing and being empowered to be change makers in their community. So yeah, we were the breakout focused on community organizing. So thinking about how to build those skills. And we didn't specifically talk as a group about our recommendations for Knoca, but we put our ideas in on the Miro. But I did see a couple there about offering trainings in organizing to folks who have gone through assemblies, and potentially Knoca playing a role in putting something like that together, or holding more conversations on that.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. Melda, does your group want feedback?
Yes, Liz bravely volunteered to try to summarize the discussion in our group. So I'll give the floor to you.
Yeah, I'm feeling very courageous. I don't know why. And the others will chip in. Yeah, I was around the power and politics and working with politicians around this, local authorities, etc. And I'm just going to just say like bullet points, what are some of the things that came out, and then what were the ideas we had for Knoca and taking this forward. So there's something a bit about, the importance of having sort of political nous and skill, and really understanding, if say it's a local authority commissioning this, or government, really understanding their policy making processes, their budget cycles, their rhythm, what are the sort of the ways in, who are the interlocutors, what are the kind of points of entry. So how might it be important if you're doing this sort of thing in terms of the follow through, but also in the lead up as well, that the people who are designing these, or facilitators, really have a good grasp of that. And there's some ideas we have later on that. I think there was also something about how to make the case for citizens' assemblies in terms of what's in it for politicians. So it's seen as actually something that can actually support them in their work, rather than seen as being antagonistic. And how might it be different to lobby groups? So again, some awareness raising is really important, so that there may be the follow through is sustained. And in terms of holding their feet to the fire, this feeling that it can be quite Wild West in the kind of that kind of whole political side. So being able to really get a good reading and putting yourself in their shoes, and being able to really help them see what some of the tensions and dilemmas that this whole process might raise for them, and what it might mean in terms of losing power and control. We did also talk about the importance on the follow-up about who owns both the recommendations, but also who communicates them. And if it gets bogged down in the communications department, particularly local authorities, it can get really diluted. So again, trying to make sure that that is thought through. And then in terms of the role of facilitator, we also said a little bit about how we ourselves could get involved in moving from, say, a neutral role to shaping the narrative afterwards, and just how do we negotiate that and some of the kind of personal dilemmas it raises for us. So when we got to looking at what Knoca could do, could we look at developing some standards or principles that could be applied in different contexts for facilitators and practitioners to really grapple with understanding the political kind of mindset, ways of working, what are the sorts of things you have to think about, what are the entry points, who are the interlocutors, when those conditions aren't favorable, what do you do? And also looking at how might NGOs adapt some of their training for suppliers and co-production in this respect as well. So those who are providing training in this, how might they adapt some of their training for citizens' assemblies? I think that's probably, I'm going to just check. Any of my teammates want to say anything? I rattled through very quickly.
They all look really, really happy, Liz, with you.
I can't see anybody. So.
Don't see anybody waving or anything, so that's good. Thanks, Liz.
Okay.
Okay, so my group was process and resources, and unfortunately nobody volunteered, so I took on the role of taking notes, and I did a really crap job of it. So we talked about support and the need for resources to provide this support. So there was a question about who should offer that support to participants after a process is finished. So maybe the obvious choice is civil servants or people that work for local authorities, but is there a danger there? Because if some of the recommendations are particularly challenging of the government or local authority, then there might be some tension there. So maybe it's better sat with organizations like those that are facilitating the process, maybe, or others. Although there was a question in the group about, well, some facilitating organizations are very committed to not appearing to be in any way biased. So they want to maintain this image of impartiality. So might that be threatened if they're then seen to be supporting jury members or assembly members after a process on certain recommendations? But the need for support was definitely echoed by everybody. For example, in Austria, there was a conversation about how almost the response from government to the recommendations almost needed to be kind of translated into language that everybody would be able to understand. So that was an important role of the post-process support there. We talked about respect, and maybe if there's no follow-up, no decent follow-up with citizens after a process, that actually it's really disrespectful. But also we need to be respectful of people's experiences during a process and after a process in terms of safeguarding and looking after people's well-being and mental health. We talked a little bit about how we should definitely be pooling resources to be able to think about how we can best support citizens after they've been through processes. And so there's lots of examples that we've had here. It would be great to try and pool some of that. And Rune's training program is definitely an example of maybe how we could cooperate and work together to support each other in this area of work. And finally, we talked about when is it best to, we talked with the Blackburn group about when is it best to talk about the possibility of doing stuff after a process is finished. And some of the group there were saying that if maybe we'd, as facilitators, had talked about this at the start, some people actually might have been put off and thought, oh my God, I'm signing up for stuff here that sounds like it's going to just take so much of my time in the future. So I think the group liked how it was quite organic in the idea that that something could happen after the process had finished, kind of evolved for everybody. And because of the very poor facilitation by myself, we didn't get time to talk about what Knoca could do, but we all felt that Graham would be brilliant at it. We had a vote on that, and that's what came out of it. So Graham's going to explain that now. Thanks, my group. Over to you, Graham.
So am I back on? Okay, right. Thanks, Pete. So it's all my responsibility now, apparently. Fantastic. Listen, this has been a really great session. You can sometimes, sometimes when you're setting these things up, you say, are people going to be that interested? Is it going to be something which is going to capture people's imagination? But I know this is online, but there's been a lot of energy in the last two and a bit hours, and it seems to have flown past really, really fast. So clearly we're really onto something here. In terms of what we're going to do next, obviously, we're going to share with you the video. If you want to go and revisit the wise words of Pete and colleagues, that will be made available. And also a short feedback we'll feedback some comments, and we'll bring together the various ideas and issues that were raised from in this call. Clearly, Knoca does need to do more work here, and I will commit to working with Pete and with Morten and others who have been on the call to try and think what those next steps could be. I think there's at least 2 or 3 obvious things which we can do quite quickly. One, which is to sort of bring together some of the practices that actually are already out there, so people actually know what other people have done. The second would be to try and provide, I'm not sure guidance as in what you should do, but kind of like options about the different ways that you could approach it. And thirdly, to start to think about what training, inverted commas, training might look like that could be shared by others. So I think no doubt we'll do that. And it may be that what we need to do is to have some shorter or more intense follow-up calls on specific aspects of this rather than the whole element of it. But I'll take some advice from Pete, from Morten, and please do send us any comments you've got. And I think the board will be up there for a few more hours. So if you've got other things you want to throw on there, please do. So this is certainly an area of work where we can feel that there is a real need in our community for much more input, and we will be developing that. So just before you go, just a couple of adverts. Always have to advertise things at the end. We're doing another really challenging workshop in a couple of weeks' time, which is actually on whether or not climate assemblies are places that you can talk about systems change, or whether they're just places that you can do policy work. So I think this is a really interesting question, because I know a lot of people in the climate world are very focused on how do we create spaces for thinking about system change, whether that's questions of degrowth, whether it's questions of other forms of transition. Can we do that within assemblies, and how do we do that? And then we've also got an open call out at the moment. We have a annual event on the 21st of June. And we'd really like to do, as part of that annual event, an innovations open space. So where people who are doing interesting things with assemblies, maybe you've done something interesting with recruitment, or interesting with impact, or even something interesting post assembly with participants, then please send us an email, because we'll put you into our innovations workshop where people can find out about what other people in our community are doing. Both of those elements, one of them, the systems change, is on our news feed. Is on our events feed. The open call is on our news feed, and we've got a new website, front of house on our website, and both items are there. So once again, listen, I just want to say thank you so much for Pete for taking up the challenge of running this workshop, and for Morten and Melda, who worked so closely with him, and for Nana, who did the technical work. So thank you for all my colleagues at DBT, and for all of the other contributors, all of you who actually gave your kind of 3, 4, 5 minute contributions, and everyone else who contributes, particularly the members from Austria and from Blackburn with Darwin. It's been a really fantastic afternoon, and there is so much going to come out of this. It's going to be fantastic. All right, take care, everybody. See you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.